in part, what Putin represents politically is similar in many ways to what Modi represents. We think it's also important because of the presenter here, Kavita Krishnan, who really doesn't need a long introduction. She's got a long history in the student movement, in the women's rights movement, and also in the struggle for socialism. And she really has displayed exemplary courage and integrity by being willing to break from long-time associates over matters of fundamental principle. And unfortunately, not every socialist has displayed that those same qualities. So with that, Kavita, welcome. And would you, I don't know how long you plan to speak. Would you like a reminder as far as time?
Yes, please. Yes, that would be great. Yeah, a reminder maybe, that would be really welcome.
Okay, so maybe
so about
like
what
after
time?
half an hour or something like that?
Yeah. Half an hour is, definitely do it at 25 minutes latest.
Okay.
Yeah. Because
Okay,
I'd like to have more time for questions and all of that. So I'll try and keep
sure.
it as compact as I can. Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
so please
Sure.
go ahead, Kavita.
Yeah. So thank you so much for organizing this talk, because I have felt for very long that, when there's a discussion of, tyrants globally, of authoritarian or far right leaders globally, till quite recently, Modi would not be counted among them. And there are many reasons for that, but I do notice that more recently there has been a growing, little more attention to what the Modi phenomenon in India represents. And the need to understand it is, I think, important, because there is a distinction between the kind of politics India represents and what we like to think of as a totalitarian regime. One tends to assume that a dictator is unpopular, that people are just waiting to rise up and get rid of them, and all of that. And I think we know certainly that that is not the case in most instances. And in India, it is a very particular kind of politics that, I think, can, if looked at, people struggling in other parts of the world would do well to pay attention to what are these forms of authoritarian rule which are specific to India, but also are used elsewhere. So just to sort of very quickly lay a historical backdrop, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, this was a Hindu supremacist private sort of militia organization that was set up in 1925, so it's almost 100 years. And its founding fathers, yes, it's only a male-only organization, although it does have a women's wing and all of that. But this organization is men only, and every leader of this organization has been from the Brahmin, dominant caste. And this organization its founding fathers were open admirers of Hitler. They said repeatedly that race pride, in Germany, and the way in which the Jews have been, the policies for the Jews, these are what we should implement in a Hindu supremacist India. 1925, clearly this was a time under colonial rule, but the RSS is known for its non-participation in the anti-colonial movement, its scorn and derision for that movement, precisely because they kept saying that the real lack of freedom happens with Islam entering India. That is not the case. Muslims and Islam, they are not, they were never experienced by people in this part of the world as a colonial power, which is why you had, Hindus and Muslims, all of them getting together to fight the British. And that is how Indian nationalism is born, actually. And again, I do not use the word nationalism to describe Hindu supremacist politics. The reason is because in former colonial countries like India, nationalism is not a bad word. It is not. It does not have negative connotations. It does not connote, necessarily a xenophobic or a, anti-democratic kind of thing, which is why I make that distinction. But this organization is set up in 1925, and quite understandably, probably before, when the anti-colonial struggle is running, then this is basically seen as a lunatic fringe. It does not have that kind of support. After, at the time that India becomes independent and adopts a sort of modern constitution, the RSS says quite openly that, this constitution is all Western derivative. Where are the Indian values, of caste supremacy and patriarchy? And they cite the Hindu, so-called kind of scriptural law book to say, okay, this should have been the constitution, and so on. And they're quite openly Hindu supremacist, Islamophobic. And one of the results of their, they do not claim ownership of that act of political assassination and terrorism. But certainly the person who killed Gandhi, Nathuram Godse, was someone who had had a backdrop, who had had a RSS backdrop, and he had had training in the RSS. And so he kills Gandhi out of a Hindu supremacist motive, essentially. Now, at that time, the RSS is historically unpopular. It is not a popular organization. But so that it's too long a journey to explain. But from then, you can imagine that now in 2023, you are in a place where for the last 8.5 years, you have had a very leading member of the RSS as one of the most popular prime ministers of India. He's won 2 terms. He's in his 2nd term now, Narendra Modi. And this is now an organization that quite recently, some months ago, the RSS chief described, the Hindu nation. He said that we are in an accelerating car that has no brakes, that is heading towards the Hindu nation. Nothing can stop it. You're welcome to get on with us on that journey. But if you stand in our way, you will be obliterated. We will obliterate you. And this metaphor, he just used it some months ago. And essentially, this confidence has come because of an electoral success of the Bharatiya Janata Party, which is the political wing of the RSS. Now, how that has happened and why, that's a very long story. I can recommend really good books to read about why that is the case. But just to look at this phenomenon as we experience it now. So although the RSS is this very, very anti-democratic organization, which has only Brahmin leaders and no women and all of that, what they have succeeded in doing in all these years is to speak in different languages, in different registers to different audiences, and therefore to basically create considerable support for themselves. And it has helped that RSS is one of the only organizations in the whole country, more than any political party probably, for years now, to have a kind of network that goes into literally every street, every lane in India. So every village, everywhere. So they do have that network, and they have a network of schools and so on. Their ideology, in the pure sense of what they represented and what they want, was a Hindu supremacist nation that was not just the political contours of India today, but they consider basically what they call undivided, unbroken India, Akhanda Bharat, which means basically which includes some 12 modern nations, which includes all of India's neighbors, the Maldives, and Afghanistan, a whole lot of countries. So they claim that is all part of the Hindu empire, and that is what they want to recover. And if Muslims, and they say that Muslims are the biggest hurdle in the way of recovering this, because Muslims in India work as a sort of fifth column kind of thing. They are born in India, but their religious places, Mecca and so on. So Islamophobia is one of the major things, but also Muslims are the biggest minority in India, but Christians are also a considerable minority. So they have a lot of anti-Christian hate and violence as well, basically saying that they're all out to convert, and this is also colonial conversion and all of that. So right now, Modi in power, how has this been playing out in terms of policy? There's a lot to think about there, but I'll just say that two things to pay attention to. One is that the nationalist rhetoric used by the Hindu supremacist politics, um, it it certainly plays on the very natural anti-colonial sentiment that Indians have, quite rightly so. But it also, muddies that with the sense of identity and religious supremacy. And at the same time, it also conflates that with this idea of pride in India. So the idea of pride in India is basically to say that, okay, Narendra Modi, look, he's making, India visible everywhere. There was never a leader like him before. All of which is not true, of course. But, Jawaharlal Nehru did not live in a time of social media. So, they are able to, claim this, statesman status for Modi. So that plays a very big role, which is why, Modi's foreign policy, the fact that he, goes around meeting all these world leaders and hugging them and shaking hands with them and making sure that these images, so those images are not, to impress the foreign leaders. Those images are for a domestic distribution in which people really believe that Modi, basically, everybody is looking to Modi to solve the Russia-Ukraine war, that people are going to listen to him. And ridiculous as that may sound to an outside audience, it is actually, believed and disseminated here. The other important thing to keep in mind is that while the Hindu supremacist right has often spoken a language, sort of anti-capitalist language. In fact, Modi, one of the things that plummeted him to power was his rhetoric against crony capitalism, which is, again, something very similar to Trump saying drain the swamp and all of that. So basically what Modi did was to say that, anti-corruption is my big thing. In fact, Modi's regime is probably the most the most dependent on crony capitalism. You may have seen news about one of the richest men in the world. I think he's surpassed Bill Gates or something, Gautam Adani. Gautam Adani is a big Indian capitalist whose fortunes basically rose with those of Narendra Modi politically in the state of Gujarat and then nationally. And he has recently, he has suffered somewhat of a setback because of his scams, basically. The thing is that Adani, Ambani, these are huge capitalists and they bankroll Modi. They control most of India's media organizations. And so most of Indian media, especially television media, are propagandist, openly propagandist for Hindu supremacy as well as for Modi. So there is no, the independent media is basically now reduced largely to digital media. And even that, people are afraid about how long that will last. And so this kind of crony capitalism and electoral funding, in the name of transparency of electoral funding, Modi has introduced a law, the Modi government has introduced a law that actually allows, donations, secret donations. So those donations are, the sources of those donations are unknown. So it's called an electoral bond scheme. And so and BJP is the beneficiary of more than 95% of those bonds. Who pays, whose money is coming in, no one knows. And yet this is not a policy that is discussed much. It was passed through in parliament by the unparliamentary route as a money bill, so it was not discussed as a policy a policy debate in parliament, and essentially the government is quite open. The BJP is quite open in saying we want an opposition-free India. They call it a Congress-free India because the Indian National Congress is one of the major opposition parties. But essentially by that, they mean an opposition-free India. And now this, very quickly, let me run through some of the policies that he's brought in, which we should know about. One is, of course, these pro-corporate farm laws, which farmers basically agitated for a whole year, and he was forced to withdraw those laws. But in withdrawing them also, just before a very crucial election, basically, it just shows you that the BJP and, the Modi government is an intelligent, politically very intelligent party. They are not bound by, the idea of, people often say, oh, this is arrogant, and so they're not going to ever back off and all of that. Sure, all that is true, but they too know when to back down when they need to, and they did. But some of the policies which we should pay attention to, one is the combined package of a national register of citizens, which the government wishes to prepare, along with, which means basically deciding who is a citizen, who is not, and putting out a list of those whose citizenship is in doubt. So this happened in the state of Assam. In Assam, it was not so much targeted only against Muslims, it was targeted against Bengali-speaking people, which included Bengali-speaking Muslims as well as Bengali-speaking Hindus. That rendered about 20 million, potentially stateless. They are in limbo right now. But the majority of them were not, did not only include Muslims. So the BJP, which wants to implement this all over the country, now has a problem that if we do this NRC, and then there's a lot of Hindus who start figuring out that, oh my God, we don't have papers. We have to prove that our, my parents' basically came to India and they were citizens before such and such date. How am I going to prove that? So when poor people, especially poor women, don't have documentation, don't have paperwork. So when they realize that this may become a problem where Hindus as well feel that their citizenship may be in danger, they brought in this Citizenship Amendment Act. And Modi's Lieutenant Amit Shah, very sinister character with, various a series of assassination cases in which he was eventually the charges were dropped against him. He basically gave these speeches where he explained, he used the word chronology. So he said, please understand the chronology. I'm assuring you, please understand, this is how it's going to go. So he said, first we will pass the Citizenship Amendment Act, which basically means that we will welcome refugees from Bangladesh, Pakistan, Afghanistan, who are, to take,
that you are
welcome to become.
I'm coming, I can't hear you.
Oh, yeah.
Oh my God.
You can't? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
No, this is someone who's barged into the meeting. We got to get rid of him. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. So I should go on. Should I?
Yeah, continue, please. Yeah.
Yeah. So this so he says that, okay, this is a law which will allow non-Muslim refugees. And he lists it. He says, if you're Hindu, if you're Buddhist, if you're Jain, if you're Christian, and you are a refugee from these countries, you are welcome. But if from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Bangladesh. But because these are Muslim majority countries, if you are a Muslim refugee, you won't be offered citizenship. You won't be offered a fast ticket to citizenship. So he explains this in public audiences, saying, so understand the chronology. First, we pass the CA, and then we implement the National Register of Citizens. So if you are, if you are not an infiltrator, and the infiltrator is an termite, these are two words that Amit Shah uses as basically dehumanizing words for Muslims. where he implies that Muslims in India are basically just infiltrators from other countries. They don't belong here. And, they have infiltrated India's body fabric like termites. So he says, if you're not an infiltrator or a termite, you will have your road back to citizenship through the CA. The CA is there for you. You will already be, so you won't experience a moment of lack of citizenship. So, so they implement these two things, but there's an enormous movement against it. And the movement basically faces its participants are attacked in huge riots in Delhi, which begin around the time that Donald Trump visits India in January. And because the protests basically spiked around that time. And then, of course, COVID, lockdowns hit. And during lockdown, the government basically used an anti-terror law, which basically allows the government to arrest anyone based on any kind of laughable, ridiculous claim, charge. But because you're allowed under that law, the judiciary has very little leeway to give you bail. So until the police, so-called concludes their investigation and a trial begins, the police can just drag out that process and you will find yourself in prison for years on end without bail and without trial. So this is what has happened to a whole lot of young people who participated, who led that movement, who participated in that movement. And the other thing to pay attention to is that the use of Pegasus software. This is a software developed by an Israeli firm, which is sold only to state actors. So the Israeli government actively sort of, it's part of its foreign relations policy and its trade policy to basically sell Pegasus to various they say we'll only sell it to states, not to random political actors. So Indian government has never yet said on record that whether they did buy Pegasus or not. But there is enormous evidence that Pegasus was used to and continues to be used to spy on a whole range of people, a large number of people, including journalists, political activists, opposition figures, some figures in the ruling party, whom presumably Mr. Modi and Shah do not trust. But, and apart from that, judges, you name it. It's a very, very long list of people. And this is software that basically can, basically use your phone to spy on you, whether, at all times, basically, including in your private relationships or anywhere. And so that's one thing to keep track of. There are other policy things that we can talk about, but ideologically what's being pushed is that the Indian constitution is in place. It is not, they are not saying we're going to, in fact, they keep saying if anybody from abroad, from anywhere in the world says, oh, but you're not a democracy, you're doing this, you're doing that. They say, oh, but India has this wonderful constitution. And sure enough, it does. But, one of when the head of the Constituent Assembly, which drafted India's constitution, when it was submitted on the floor of the Constituent Assembly, the first draft, then the person who headed that committee, Dr. Ambedkar, who was also a liberation leader of the most oppressed castes in India and a very remarkable figure, he said something which was very unusual to say at a time which was a triumphant time of, post-colonial sort of constitutional nation building. So he presented that constitution and he said, look, we tried to, make it democratic. But then he said, look, democracy is only in the top soil in India. Indian society is very anti-democratic, and he should know. He was from a oppressed caste that was considered untouchable. And he talked about this. And then he said that, look, I fear for a day, because Indians like to make, worship a political leader. And he kept saying that however great a political leader is, do not, surrender your liberties at the feet of that leader. And he specifically said that I see an electoral route to this kind of dictatorship in India. No, they will not have to replace the constitution. This can happen just if you get a landslide, one-sided political victory and the opposition is weak, because then this popular leader could well just keep the constitution in place and yet hollow out its essence. And essentially, I mean, that is his fear coming true. He had also said that if India becomes a Hindu nation, that would be the biggest disaster possible for the country. So that's what we're basically witnessing happening here. I'll just, I'll end by making a few comments about the things to watch out for. If you're outside India and you are trying to understand what is happening here, then some of the things to watch out for a little bit, because I see that, it's been very frustrating to us to see that sometimes it looks as though the Indian politics and the far right presence in Indian politics and domination of Indian politics seems to be illegible to people who are, secular, democratic in many parts of the world. Now, of course, I mean, when I see what's happening to Ukraine and the fact that, Vladimir Putin and Russia seem completely illegible to all my friends in India, I keep telling them that this is what you were complaining about when people do not understand, what is happening in India, because India has a thriving democracy, people vote and all of that. So one of the things to watch out for is that what I see in Narendra Modi's government's policy, in its language, in its presentation, is basically an inversion where, and that is a very common strategy, which is also in use, by the way, in Russia, in other places, where you claim to be the victim of exactly what you are inflicting on others. And that kind of inversion takes various forms. One very common one is that, for instance, if you take a BBC documentary recently on Narendra Modi's, it was a 2-part documentary, very excellent one, which came out, which was about the anti-Muslim violence in 2002 in Gujarat when Narendra Modi was chief minister. And there are, the most effective parts of those, that documentary is interviews done by a BBC reporter at that time with Modi. That was a time when Modi gave interviews to the BBC. In the last 8.5 years, he has never addressed a press conference, and he has never given an interview to a journalist who is not, who has not already been given the set of questions to ask and which he's willing to reply to. So that was the time when he did. And so his response there is very revealing. He comes out in his full sort of, intimidating and quite sinister avatar, basically telling the BBC reporter that you are part of this foreign conspiracy and all of that. So in the wake of that, and then there was also a speech somewhere by George Soros who said, about this crony capitalist Adani, that, his fortunes are falling and maybe Narendra Modi's fortunes may follow. Side note, doesn't really help for Soros to be saying any of this, because, say it, if it happens, why are you, you're saying it doesn't help. It can only do harm. But the point is that, the government's response to this, so Jaishankar, who is a very, very articulate Minister of External Affairs and a very intelligent articulator of Hindu supremacist politics today, because he does not appear to be so. He looks like a very, very, modern democratic speaker. And he uses the language of democracy and anti-colonialism and anti-imperialism, which is why, which is what I hear Putin doing as well. I think Jaishankar does it even better, by the way. So he says about the BBC documentary, he said, look, these are all these colonial people. This is a colonial mindset. The British are behaving, BBC, they're doing it it's a part of British politics. And he is implying that they're doing it, somebody is doing it because somebody wants Muslim votes in Britain, or that in America, if America raises questions about human rights in India and violence against Muslims, then he'll say, you're doing vote bank politics in America. So basically, you want Muslim votes in America. That's one thing. The other thing he says is that this is colonialism. You are telling the world how to live. You are telling us that we aren't capable of ruling ourselves. You British, you always said so. You're saying so again. So he said this in response to the BBC documentary, in response to Antony Blinken, in response to any criticism of his government's policies. So the problem is, let me give you one particularly interesting example. So in 2021, I think when there was some Freedom House report, I think, which said India is an electoral autocracy. So he said something about, these rules, these standards, these definitions of democracy, they are all imposed by the West. And, we have our own standards of democracy. Who are you to dictate things to us? Then he gave an example. He said, at least in our country, nobody questions election results. So this was a comment on Trump. All right. But the point is that Trump is Modi's best pal. I mean, they campaign for each other. Modi and Trump, they deliberately coined, Modi's own slogan, "Ab ki baar Modi Sarkar." So this time, vote for the Modi government. He used the same thing in a huge rally for Trump, and Trump has used the same phrase himself, and all of that. So, Hindu supremacist groups in India love Trump. Yeah. Are you telling me I'm done? My time have I exhausted my time? Yeah, I'm almost done. Yeah.
No, somebody else interrupted. Everybody, please keep your mics on mute.
Yes.
You've been speaking about a half an hour, but take your time.
Yes. Yeah. So just a few minutes more. So this is one thing that Jaishankar does. The other thing he does is, so he's done this very often. There's a speech of his where he tells the West that the world does not revolve around Europe, and you people should remember that, we are no longer your subjects and all of that. And this went really viral. It was viral in China. It was viral in Russia. It was certainly viral in India. And, a lot of people, including, by the way, those who do not approve of the Modi government, they were enormously, they were very, very appreciative of that particular speech of his. The thing is that, that's the problem, that because he is using the strategy of associating democracy with the West, and then saying that the West has double standards on democracy. What is left unsaid is that there should be no standards. Who are you to set standards? So any standards are Western standards. So any rules, any rule of law internationally, these are Western rules. And so we don't have to. Anti-imperialism means that these laws don't apply to us. We have a civilization discourse. And Narendra Modi himself has said this at various places, international fora. He keeps referring to India as the mother of democracy. What is meant by that is two things. One is to say that we have a civilizational history of democracy, and which is not Western. And so we don't need to follow Western standards of democracy. So the idea is that, democracy, which is beyond just electoral democracy, which means that you respect, you ensure the dignity and rights of minorities, the dignity and rights of dissent, of protest, of the individual rights. This is Western. And so what is the civilizational democracy Modi is talking about? Well, on the Constitution Day this year, he made that very clear, where there is basically a guideline that was put out by the Indian Council for Historical Research, which is also in the hands of these people now. So this note basically said, to cut a long story short, it said that India has always had democracy. What does he mean by that? That these village councils, now the village councils are basically a caste supremacist councils, and councils that are always men and caste supremacist. And, when Dr. Ambedkar, the person I told you about, who headed the constitutional drafting committee, in that speech, he had said that we have discarded, we were asked and we said, no, we decided that we cannot consider this to be a form of democracy. We are firmly opting for individual rights, not for these village councils, which, are basically extremely anti-democratic and violent organizations. He said so in very, very strong words. So this time, they're not openly doing debate with Ambedkar, but they are just saying, okay, this is India's democracy. And that is what we stand for. And that's the way we will do democracy. And this is Hindu civilization and all of that. Another little thing is about basically one last thing, which is that the use of the term Hinduphobia. So you see, Islamophobic policies define the RSS, they define the Modi government, but they're able to, in the rest of the world, especially in America and in the UK, I've seen them doing that. That is to use, to weaponize the idea that Hindus and Indians are a minority. The problem is that it isn't just Hindu Indians who experience racism in the US, right? It is Indians, it is Pakistanis, it's South Asians of so many kinds. You are not getting picked on just because you are only Hindu. But the idea that this is Hinduphobia. What is Hinduphobia? Any criticism of caste supremacy, any attempt to regulate caste discrimination in America or the UK, any attempt to basically criticize the Modi government, all this is Hinduphobia. And so, that is a phrase which they use to try and, invert basically the understanding of democracy. And the other thing which really hurts me a lot is the way that even, people I respect in the US, would fall for the RSS and BJP's feminist language, which is absolutely appalling to me. I feel like, before you write, maybe you should call up an Indian friend and ask an Indian feminist what they think of this language. So for instance, in Modi's policy of protect daughters, save your daughters. So basically, it was a very well-known feminist in America actually wrote that, okay, this is feminist language. Finally, Modi is terrible, but this is feminism speaking. Even in other contexts, for instance, the attempt to prevent hijab from being worn in schools and all of that. These are packaged as feminism in certain parts of the world. It's actually quite the opposite. But these are things to basically watch out for. So I guess I should end here. And we can speak more later. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kavita, for that comprehensive review. So anybody that wants to ask a question or make a comment, please use the raise hand function. And I see Mudassir. Go ahead, Mudassir.
Good evening, ma'am. It's Mudassir here. So your speech at the end, I could listen because I mistook the time. Yeah, it was a very good speech. Basically, it is very nice. So basically, what I think is like, what do you think of like the so-called multipolarity joining in? Like, will it be like Saudi Arabia and Iran and India will join together to ally with global Islamophobes? Because what I have been noticing is like, if you look at the Saudi embassy's Twitter handle and things like that in New Delhi, a lot of Islamophobic people have been invited. So do you think Riyadh and Tehran will join in that angle? Because you also had tweeted on Twitter that Sondarwal of Assam was with this the foreign minister of Iran or with the president, I think, during the so-called revolution's 40th anniversary. That's the first point. And secondly, that is like, how well do you assess the Hindu-phobic campaign, quote unquote? Like, is it very impactful in the West or things like that? Because there's been mixed messaging. Like what the Hindu alt-right says is that Jaishankar is not a very good foreign minister and things like that. And that's what he was saying. And that's the second point. And the last point is like, how much of a threat is the Hindu alt-right? Because if you look at what they did in Sulideals and Bolibai, and most of them are on bail. So how do you think of this? And how does Congress fit into it? Because Congress is saying the same things nowadays when it comes to beef and all that. So how does this go? That's the only thing. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Mudassar. So
Yeah.
we'll take
Yeah, take
few
2-3
questions
questions.
and
maybe.
comments
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then
sure,
yeah,
sure,
so,
sure. Yeah.
so Linda.
Oh, hi. I have a more general question, which is, I'm sure it's what a lot of people are wondering on this in this group is, what is the nature you think of Modi's alliance with Russia? I mean, or India's alliance with Russia? And I noticed that both of these leaders have nuclear weapons, and I know Russia's always threatening to blow people up. It isn't just this one particular war. Is there any? I mean, that's kind of one thing that crossed my mind is, you know, how is this? I know China has the weapons too, but it isn't constantly shooting its mouth off about killing it, destroying the planet. But I don't know. I mean, what is Modi is kind of a cipher when it comes to his relationship to Russia and how far he's willing to go to support Putin, and even how much of an ideology they share, even though I consider both of them fascists. But thank you.
Thanks, Linda. Ted.
Unmute. Okay, there. Thank you, Kavita. I have to admit that my ignorance of India is still huge. But I have two questions. How does Modi justify his foreign policy, or how does he square it with his Hindu nationalism? Since the people he relates to internationally are, in Putin's case, he's a Russian Orthodox nationalist. And those things are in conflict. In fact, the whole idea of multipolarity, like we have talked about before, is all of these conflicting reactionary nationalism. You know, Bolsonaro's, the one in Iran, Saudi Arabia, for that matter. So I don't understand how Modi deals with that in India. The second question I have is unrelated to the first one. It's how the Indian left is large. How does it deal with Modi? It seems like it has been a complete failure in countering Modi's policies. But I don't know. So I have the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Ted. Bradley.
Thank you, Kavita, for your excellent presentation. It reminds us that we are engaged in an internationalist solidarity campaign. And you've reminded us that so is the neo-traditionalist reactionary far right. They are actively putting together, in my opinion, their own international, if you will. And this includes tolerance of other forms of reactionary pseudo-religious politics in every other country, according to Alexander Dugin, if you saw his interview recently.
Yeah.
My specific point, I work in Silicon Valley. I daily work with many immigrants from India. And I'm always curious about, what I don't want to assume, and be prejudiced and assume that every Indian that here is perhaps Hinduva. But I do assume that most Indians that immigrate to the United States have somewhat of a privilege. They have education, they probably come from the so-called middle class or whatever. I could be wrong about that. But we do know as for a fact that the biggest rallies that Trump held in his entire campaign were Howdy Modi in Texas, where 50,000 people showed up, probably almost entirely Indian immigrants in Texas, to see Modi and Trump on the same stage. And then Trump paid Modi back by going to India and having even a larger rally of over 100,000 people filled up the stadium. These were Trump's single largest rallies that he ever had for himself in his entire career. Were therefore made up of, in this case, Hindu South Asian people. So, but on the other hand, and this I'm leading up my question, if you have any idea of really of the political composition of Indian immigrants, as well as their class composition in places like the United States and Britain and so on and so forth. So I don't have, at least I won't be prejudiced and think that everyone is a secret Hinduva, because we have, I'm going to end here. We have examples like Miss Sawant in Seattle, on the other hand. There are many progressive Indians, I'm sure, if not socialists. So I'll end it there. That's my question.
Thanks, Bradley. Cheryl?
Yeah, Brad said some of what I was going to say, which is that it's been apparent for some time now that I don't know what to call them, the fascist-leaning tyrants and dictators of the world all have similar methods. They have parallel ideologies, whether it's Bongo in the Philippines or Modi in India or Putin in Russia, and the list goes on and on. It would be useful to make an entire list of them and all of the characteristics that they share, because they share many. I mean, Kavita, when you were speaking, I thought, well, this applies to Putin, this applies to Trump, so many of these elements of right-wing populism, and how they have their own international, and I don't know exactly how well they're organized, but they clearly are well organized, and Modi is clearly one of the leaders. So it's very sobering and it's very chilling. And it makes the work that we're doing so much even more important. And in the face of it, I guess, I don't know if this is a question. Yes, it is a question, which is, so here in the United States, we are facing another presidential election in 2024, and Trump is clearly going to run. He actually could become the next president of the United States. And the Democrats don't have a candidate, really, Joe Biden. I'm curious, again, sort of like follows with Ted's question, is that what are the forces in India that are opposing Modi, and in what ways would they be part of kind of a new socialist or a new socialist international, and how can that be further developed? Yeah, it's a big question.
Thanks. Yeah, are you finished, Cheryl? Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Simon?
Yeah, just two short questions. One is actually close to what Brad was asking a little bit, because he was asking about the diaspora. And what we can clearly see is this paradox that we, as leftists, as socialists, are opposed to any kind of prejudice towards migrants. But we also have to see that in some migrant groups, there is the popularity of their leaders in their country. We can see that in the Turkish community in whole Europe, where there are many Erdogan supporters in Germany, for example, or in Belgium, or in the Chinese diasporas, which many of them are quite sympathetic and close to the CPP. And maybe it's also a case in the Indian diasporas. But my question is a little bit different, because there is, of course, I live Pakistan, Afghanistan, they're Muslim countries and don't want to nothing with Indian nationalism, but there are many countries in the world which have either an Indian majority or a big Indian minority. I mean, like Fiji, Trinidad and Tobago, Mauritius, Suriname, for example. There's quite a lot of them. Are you aware of any influence of the Hindu supremacy ideology in these countries, in the Hindu communities in these countries? That's one question. And the second one is, as we are in a meeting on the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign, it's a question rooted in the group's name, I guess. We can clearly see this kind of, I don't know if you can call it an international, but we can call it a dialogue of these autocrats, yeah? And it is pragmatic, I guess, but maybe it has also some ideological influence in it. So my question is, because it was very well written in the international press at some point that, for example, the Hindutva members were praying for Trump. They were organizing prayers for Trump. Is there something similar towards Putin? Do they know some Putin's ideology? They say that we are close to these ideals or something like that, or it's just more like a pragmatic way of, we are autocrats, we share, we have to oppose the West, and that's it. So that's my question. Sorry for taking so much time. So that's it.
Thanks, Simon. I have a couple of comments actually that I'd like to make, and I think that the point that Kavita made when she started her remarks, that not every dictator just simply imposes their will on an unwilling population and is completely unpopular with that population, that's not always the case. And we can see a lot of what Kavita described and other people have alluded to, we can see similar tendencies all throughout the world, and I mean, in Israel, which always was, Zionism always was a reactionary movement, and and a racist and nationalist in the reactionary sense movement. It always was, and it always had a fascist element to it. At times that element was stronger or weaker, but now it's exactly that element that is reasserting itself with increased strength. And you see similar things like with Viktor Orban in Hungary, the AfD in Germany, Italy, France, and so on. And a couple of people have commented on the situation here in the United States. Incidentally, when Kavita, when you talked about that sense of victimization, I mean, if it weren't so dangerous, it would be really funny here, where the right-wing DeSantis and so on, and there's a big base for that here. They talk, it's white people that are victimized by Black people, according to them. So you see that same thing. Another thing that's similar, as I understand it, when Modi first came to power, the majority, the great bulk of the capitalist class was, if any, at least skeptical of him. And there was one or two, I think, what's his name, Agani, who supported him. But in any case, here in the United States, that was certainly the case with Trump, and it still is. But there's a layer of capitalists, particularly, for instance, Elon Musk, who have now moved into his camp. And I think part of the reason is you see a crisis in the world working class movement. And that is reflected in a crisis of the socialist movement. And the last thing I just want to make a point on is, with that crisis and the weakness of the working class, in a situation of chaos, there's a tendency to try to return to the ancient traditions. And in fact, it's really interesting to study the writings of this guy, René Guénon, who lived in the in the early 20th century. And what did he focus on? He started off by looking at Hinduism, and then he ended up converting to Islam. And he was kind of one of the founding mentors, in a sense, of Alexander Dugin, who also, and that's what you see is in this period of chaos and confusion and the weakness of the working class, you see an attempt to return to the so-called ancient traditions, which are really feudal traditions, not even early capitalist, feudal traditions. And the last point, I think, is what's really needed is a new, genuine working class socialist international. And, the old socialist movement, well, is dead and gone, and what remains is for history to bury it. So those are my comments.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else that would like to speak? Or, well, Kavita, why don't you go ahead and respond, and then maybe some people will have some further questions and comments.
Sure. So let me just start with, I think all the questions have opened up really interesting, interesting stuff that it's important to get into. But before that, I'll just clarify a couple of facts. One is that I often, at the time of Trump's election in 2016, I remember, in India, so many of us commenting on the fact that, of course, it's terrible in America. But, various institutions to different effect, different degrees, are kind of standing up. They're not completely supine before it. And that included the media and, corporate media, obviously. In India, all news is Fox News, and Fox News on steroids. Okay, Fox News. I sometimes watch Fox News, and I think, all right. There's somebody can be invited on Fox News who's say Muslim and arguing intelligently against Islamophobia, and he's able to finish his sentences. He is able to speak, argue, and then leave. Indian television is not like that. 2015 onwards, I avoid it like the plague, because basically, it's a staged show where essentially, there are good guys and bad guys, and if you go on it, you're basically going there to be their bad guy, and your voice will be shut down. They'll just mute you, and then get people to yell at you. And it's really toxic. It is so toxic. So corporate Modi, in fact, as I said, in 2002, after 2002, Modi was considered politically an embarrassment for even the BJP, a liability outside Gujarat. So various parties which allied with the BJP, but which wanted, which had a Muslim constituency, they would ally with BJP, but sort of cover their, use this fig leaf that, we won't share a dais with Modi. We are with the more liberal elements in the BJP. Modi, we don't want to share a platform. Modi mustn't come and campaign in the state where we rule in alliance with BJP. That kind of thing. That changed, and bringing about that change, a huge role was played by the television media. And that was across, with very few exceptions. And that was not, much of that media was not owned by Adani at that time. It was, in fact, a lot of it was owned by Ambani, Mukesh Ambani, who is another very, very big capitalist over here. And Ambani, in fact, was known to be Congress Party's, crony capitalist before this. In fact, he was infamous for having referred to Congress as, the Congress is my shop. I can just go and, buy what I like over there. Mukesh Ambani's dad was somebody who is infamous for saying again that, we don't have to break rules when we make them. We just we don't have to break laws because we get to make the laws. So that kind of thing. So these are the organizations that completely shifted towards Modi, that built the Modi image as someone who was a development man, and he's gone beyond all that, anti-Muslim rhetoric, and, he's going to take India forward into the 21st century, this, that. So unfortunately, no, I think there were very, very few, maybe, one or two very much minor capitalists who were not part of this cabal that was celebrating Modi. So that's one thing. The other thing about multipolarity, the question asked about multipolarity by Mudassir, and also, those who referred to Dugin many times. Yes, absolutely. I think multipolarity, the kind of thing which is said, and this is, as Ted observed, these are very conflicting interests. They're all over the place. They may be in conflict with each other here and there, but basically they are united on one thing, that we want to talk about civilizational spheres of influence and civilizational ways of basically getting rid of this notion of an international rule of law and the very expectation of certain standards of democracy. So they do this by saying, okay, the democracy is a thing that the Western elites are imposing on everyone. For that matter, Trump was saying that. So this is not just like non-Western people who are saying that, right? But the point that they are, that they deliberately obscure is that democracy and what it means is something that people all over the world are wanting and demanding, you see, and that is not, people fighting for democracy. They know, what they mean by democracy, and they do not mean this kind of, authoritarian civilizational stuff. But the point is, if you define it that way, then anyone who is demanding democracy in India, say, is basically an agent. They are paid by some George Soros or whatever it is, right? So they just want a regime change. And that is where the language, which disturbs me, is where the left basically helps to bolster. It's not just damaging for the left. The left, even where it is tremendously weak, has moral capital. And that moral capital is put into basically saying exactly the same thing. That is what is deeply disturbing. This other thing I want to just talk about is what Bradley asked about, which is about, was it Bradley? No, I think Ted asked about the Indian left. No, I think that, there are Indian left, there are many kinds of the Indian left, yes, but, of all of them, across the various sections, I would say that, more than one thing is true at the same time. I think that among the most courageous and consistent opponents and, challengers of Hindu supremacist politics, right since its inception, have been on the left. They continue to be. They continue to have faced violence from those quarters, to have been killed by those quarters, and to have been jailed by those quarters, and all of that. Many of the people in prison right now, under various charges under that terror law that I talked about, many of them are very much on the left in India. They are not part of left parties, but they are certainly on the left. They would count themselves to be on the, the Marxist left. So the thing is that that is true. And I think that that is why many people in the world don't understand. For instance, they ask me, those who are of a Trotsky's persuasion among my friends internationally, they say, it took you 30 years to realize that, the left is Stalinist, and you stuck around in a Stalinist party for 30 years. But, that is not what people join these parties for. They are not, those of us who joined because these are parties that are fighting such courageous struggles against caste-based violence. They're fighting courageous struggles for women's rights and for workers' rights. And these are mass parties. These are not tiny little, they are not cliques. These are mass parties. And so they are the only parties that seem to be consistent on issues of democracy in so many ways. So I cannot stress this enough, that no, the BJP's rise is not because of a failure of the Indian left. I think that there are complicated reasons for the flaws in Indian democracy, and definitely in the policies which Indian governments have followed, which over the years include ruling parties, which have allowed this the BJP to grow. But that's for another day. I think that's one thing. The other thing is, yes, there are, you can see some of those, what you're seeing internationally with, with the Indian left basically being in chorus with Putin on all these things. The point is that they, that is a little bit of that has shown up in India, especially where the CPIM, which is one of the largest Indian left parties, they were in government in West Bengal and Kerala, two Indian states. So in West Bengal, they are not in power anymore. They're very much weakened. But in their campaign against the non-BJP ruling party there, which is, which has its own enormous problems. I'm in no way holding a flag for that party, but essentially in equating that party with the BJP and therefore speaking in BJP's language against that party, saying that, in the state elections there, basically saying that don't vote for that party, which by implication meant that a whole lot of left voters voted for the BJP. And so that kind of thing. And in Kerala, for instance, the CPM has a very strong government there. It is their government. It's the CPM government, left-led government. And that government is, basically punishing people who are protesting against Adani setting up a port in Kerala. And, they love this anti-terrorism law and use it all the time and all of that. So there are these issues. But I'm just saying in terms of these parties and most of the people who are recognized to belong to these parties, those are recognized as speaking truth to power most of the time. So it is a complicated situation there, and one cannot write off these parties with in any easy way, which is why, that's what in fact makes it so much more deplorable, the fact that they seem to be speaking the language. Just to give you one example, one of India's leading newspaper, leading journalists, okay, N. Ram, senior most leading journalist. He has edited papers which have really been very, very democratic, have reported on a whole lot of very democratic issues. He is known to be a voice against Hindu supremacy. He goes 2 days before the anniversary of the Ukraine invasion to the Russian Cultural Center in Chennai, South India. He goes there and he watches an exhibition on ordinary Nazism, which basically says all Ukrainians are everyday Nazis, and then gives a speech there in which he says, okay, Ukraine is, basically belong to Russia because of something that, 10th century, because of the history of the Russian Orthodox Church. And so, Zelensky shouldn't be allying with Nazis to go and disrupt this. So I wrote about this saying that, this is a man who knows that, when Hindu supremacists in India talk about Akhand Bharat, undivided India, he knows what that means. And he can't hear the same thing that Putin is saying. He thinks Putin is right when he says he has he has a right over Ukraine and various other places because of the history of the church. How can they not tell? How can they not see the same equation? But the problem is Enram has enormous credibility beyond the left. He has enormous credibility across all democratic circles, not just among socialists or leftists or whatever. So that's what I mean about, the power of these ideas when they are said by people who have earned quite genuine credibility. The other thing I want to talk about was that, immigrants, yes. I would say that in the UK, for instance, and in many other European countries, definitely a very large number of immigrants who are going there have traditionally been working class. And all immigrants are, by no means are there only Hindu immigrants from India. There are immigrants of all kinds, and not only, upper caste, there have also been like many, oppressed caste immigrants as well. In the US, there's been both kinds. As you said, there is the Silicon Valley kind who would be upwardly mobile or so-called middle class and all of that. But what I am told by friends who have been working in such areas in the US and so on, has been to caution against the idea that most Indians from a Hindu background are basically Modi supporters. That's not really true. What they tell me is that there is a section of it, of course, which is very vocal and organized. But that younger people, especially who have, including those in these kinds of jobs, tech jobs and so on, are very often not supporters of Modi at all. In fact, they have a conscious opposition to this kind of politics. So I would really caution against assuming that kind of thing. Although, of course, I mean, those huge rallies and all of that, they do show that there is a section. But what I'm told is that basically younger immigrants are of a different, different persuasion, and we should be, careful without assuming that. Another thing is that the whole, this whole anti-West kind of language that Modi speaks, or that, and you're asking how it squares up, anti-West or anti-Muslim, how it squares up with his being great pals with so many Western rulers, or so many, Muslim state heads and all of that. See, that's the thing, that it fits in with that whole multipolarity idea, that it's basically that, okay, this is the Hindu nation coming into being and being seen on par with whatever, Putin can be a Christian leader, Trump can be a, white supremacist, Christian leader, or whatever. But we get to, sup at the same table and not have not have fingers wagged at us about democracy. This is basically, and so when they say anti-West, I mean, even when Putin says anti-West, he gets applause even among, sections which ought to know better. Because if they listen a little more carefully, he is not saying he's anti-West. He is saying he's against so-called Western elites, which means he supports people who are racist, who are homophobes, who are transphobes. He says this quite clearly, but people are not listening. Likewise with Modi, I mean, when you're talking about anti-colonial, anti-imperialist, and anti-West, you're fine with right-wing Westerners. You're fine with, big corporations who are wanting to take over Indian agriculture, or whatever that is. You're quite fine with that. Another little thing about, yes, Guanon and Ebola, very important, and Dugin does take his thing from them. One thing which I keep telling my friends in India here is that we should be really alarmed that Dugin is now used via Guanon and Ebola, but he is introducing elements of the Hindu supremacist ideology here, taking it into global anti-democratic ideology and language. For instance, the use of the term Kali Yuga. So Kali Yuga is basically a term from Hindu scripture as well as mythology, where essentially it is used, and Hindu epics and all of that. I wouldn't even call those Hindu epics, but yes, these are epic poems and all of that, which use this language. So in there, the Kali Yuga is basically a time of chaos and confusion, when proper order of the world, the hierarchical order of the world, has been turned upside down. It's a world turned upside down. We know that kind of phrase from so many other, basically cultural and historic situations. But here it's a very specific thing that's meant. The order and hierarchy is a caste order and a patriarchal order. It is quite explicitly so. So Kali Yuga is described as, in the Bhagavad Gita, for instance, it is described as a time when the oppressed castes will rule, and women will, be loose. They will run loose, free from the family obligations and constraints. And essentially this means that women will be allowed to have relationships, so upper caste women with lower caste men and all of that. And that will lead to it's basically like the mixture of castes, which is like, the word miscegenation for black and white people, that kind of thing. So basically, where caste is concerned, a mixture of caste. This is and mixture of caste is supposed to produce an the word for that in Sanskrit, basically what the produce of that, people born from those unions are supposed to be sort of abominations of nature. Okay. That term is what Dugin now uses to describe what's happening in the world, thanks to what he calls liberal hegemony, democratic, anti-hierarchy ideology, as he puts it. And so he says, we have to restore proper hierarchy to society and to the world, and which has been disrupted by Western elites. Should be paying attention. The last thing I'll just say is that, I'm not going to, I can understand that you may be very disappointed and may disagree when I say this. But I must say that I have no interest whatsoever in a socialist international or, socialist, whatever resurgence of that kind. As I tell people now, my point is, we should be fighting for a greater, even in India, when Modi says, the Congress wasn't democratic and so on. Of course, the Congress wasn't. Of course, the Congress did all kinds of terrible things. I think the point is that when we say Congress has been terrible, or Biden is imperialist, or Obama was imperialist, and democracy was not, you had racism under these people, you still do, and so on and so forth. Of course, that's true. I think the point is that it's not about saying this is anti-democratic and therefore the others were all perfect democracies. The issue is that people matter. And where are people able to fight for more democracy? That should be our worry. And these authoritarian ideologies and regimes, the rise of these regimes mean that the scope to fight for more democracy shrinks enormously. And I think that the primary priority we need right now is for people across the world who are concerned about this right to fight for more democracy, to basically get together. And, in more democracy, of course, the right to healthcare, the right to education, the right to basically dignity and labor that is safe and dignified, all of that, work that is safe and dignified. I mean, all of that, of course, if that is our fight, that should be our fight. And I think that the old definitions in which we have often found ourselves trapped in terms of, I feel like anybody who thinks of themselves as a socialist today should actually, we are worth only what we are doing to create that space to fight for democracy. Any other definition, I am completely sort of done with trying to, fit this kind of struggle into the categories or the language of, Leninist or Marxist-Leninist language, and having to justify it in those terms, in terms of class analysis and this and that. No, I mean, I'm not going to do that. I think that this is a life and death struggle for people across the world, and certainly in the countries where this kind of people are in power, to basically fight for to open up the spaces to just fight for more democracy. And people do not have to identify as socialists to do that. It is up to those of us who think of ourselves as socialists to basically, make sure that in that struggle, we expand that struggle to include, all kinds of rights, that not just the right to protest, but the right to not go hungry so that you have more time for protest and all of that. I mean, I think I may be putting it in a very garbled way, but yeah, that's what I mean. I think Simon asked one question, which I just briefly, he asked about migrant groups in other countries. Take Nepal, for instance. So there has been a lot of efforts by the Indian far right and the Indian government under Modi to basically push a Hindu nationalist agenda in Nepal. And Nepal is a complicated place, but yes, I mean, everyone in Nepal, Nepali nationalism is to some extent Hindu nationalism, even on the left. Lots of problems with that, but it's there. But the point is that Hindu nationalism is not yet an anti-Muslim. It is not a Hindu supremacist nationalism, let me put it that way. This is sort of Hindu cultural nationalism. A lot of people in Nepal don't understand that it's quite different in India. So they, Nepali leftist friends ask us, oh, why are you letting the BJP be the nationalists? You all should have been the real Hindu nationalists. And so it's not a good place, but basically they try to influence that. So even in the other diaspora communities, yes, there are efforts to push this. But as I said, you see, for this to work, you need that enemy. And for Hindu supremacist nationalism to work, they basically need to have a substantial Muslim minority. If not, then, where there's a Hindu majority. Without that target, it doesn't, that's what they get their fuel from.
So with that, we'd like to thank Kavita very much for this presentation, and thank everybody for joining us. And I'm going to end the recording here. Yes. Okay, so who hasn't spoken? So Praveen, would you? Well, but before we get to with this further round of discussion, I just wanted to had clarified that I did not mean, as far as a new socialist international, the next great Bolshevik party that's composed of 100 people worldwide and that will lead the world working class. So with that, Praveen and then others.
Sure. Thank you so much, Kavita, for your excellent talk. I think I agree with most of what you said, and I see as an Indian migrant in the UK, I see that the attitude of the left, because I work in the Labour Party here, like as a volunteer, anyways, that the awareness of India and the authoritarianism is not there. So I am started like a organization with a couple of colleagues called India Labour Solidarity, which is about raising awareness of Indian labor struggles and kind of in the left, because I think a lot of the time people do think that that the support from Modi from the diaspora comes from the right itself, like so the natural allies, which is Tories or the Republicans, I guess in the case of America. But we do tend to see that there are people in the left here in the UK, and I think from these progressive organizations that I keep in touch with in America, the Indian diaspora ones, we see them in the Democrats as well. So I think it's being on the left. I think the first thing we should do is call them out. And I think the Pegasus one, which you said, was really interesting, because I think a lot of people could really do with reading about the BK16 case, which is about how technology was used to suppress the voices of the people who usually talk about the rights of the oppressed in India. And I think there was one thing I wanted to say, which is, sorry, a couple of things, sorry. Well, I'll try and be quick. I know that we've been on there for a while. So the first one is about diaspora. So how I see it as a diaspora, because I moved to the UK in 2008. And I think it's, I'm talking about the recent migrants in a way, who moved since 2008, I guess, because that's what I've seen, is that it is a reflective of what the electoral system in India has done since, in a way where I think majority of them are Modi supporters in a way, and they're organized and they have links with the existing organizations who have been supporting RSS and HSS and their soft power in a way, and try to try to become the voice of Indian society whenever the political discussions do take place. So I think it is a hard battle for the few progressive people to kind of go into those spaces and say anything against the Indian right, and try to do things in a progressive way, particularly the people from oppressed castes. So that's the one, and I think yeah. So I'll leave that there, but I think it's been a really useful discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Cheryl?
Yeah, a couple of things. Kavita, thank you for, I'm glad that this question of a quote unquote socialist international came up so that you could respond and clarify what you're thinking about, because it's really the heart of the matter in so many ways. It's just, so, you know, when we formed the Ukraine Socialist Solidarity Campaign a year ago or so, yeah, a year ago, you know, we, everybody that was part of in the beginning was, you know, was pretty much somebody who'd been involved in the socialist movement or was considered themselves a socialist. And we are explicitly anti-capitalist, but it has, it gives us the opportunity and the challenge to explain to people, well, what exactly does that mean? So just one small example is on February 25th, I had the chance to speak at the Unite for Ukraine rally in San Francisco, and so did John. And that was the first thing that I just felt like I needed to say to the people that were there, is that we are socialists, but we denounce and are completely opposed to the crimes committed by Stalin and many others in the name of socialism, and that we fight for democratic rights and so on and so forth. But so it does create an opening for a discussion with people. Well, what exactly does it mean to be a socialist in today's world? And also in the last few years, since the rise of Trump in this country and all of the other right-wing dictators or authoritarians around the world, in my lifetime, I never thought, and I think Linda Mann said this first, that we never dreamed that in our lifetime, you know, fighting to maintain the right to vote in this country would become a revolutionary demand in many ways, because it is under vicious attack. And as time goes on, I understand it more and more. But so those are just a couple of examples of things that I think fit into what you were saying, Kavita, about how what we're really fighting for is to maintain, restore, and expand democratic rights for workers around the world and for the oppressed. Rosa Luxemburg, there's a great quote from her about that, but I won't go into that. The other thing I just wanted to mention is that talking about Hindu nationalist propaganda, I'm going to talk about another Netflix film here. There's been a very popular film on Netflix called RRR. I don't know if Kavita has seen it, if anybody else here. I saw it, and it is an epic. It's a Hindu nationalist epic. And when I watched it, I didn't know that because I'm, you know, very ignorant about these things. But then I read a little bit about it later. It's an action film, and I won't go into the details, but I heard an interview later on, you know, NPR or something, where they were kind of deconstructing this film and explaining that the origins of it, it's a very subtle form of international Hindu propaganda, kind of layered Hindu nationalist propaganda buried in this action film, and it's been wildly popular. So they're very clever. I mean, again, you know, the propagandists for nationalists, they bury it in many different forms of culture, not just Hindu nationalism, but that's just one example. So.
Thanks, Cheryl. Ted?
So I want to talk about a little bit about the socialist internationalism and international idea. I think it's clear from what Kavita is doing and what all the rest of us are doing that there is a new internationalism developing all over the world. It's not the internationalism of the Fourth International, the Third International, the Second International. It's closer to the internationalism of the First International. And that's this new internationalism is feminist, it's environmentalist, it's small d democratic, and it is working class. So, in my view, that is socialism. Not completely, but partly. All of those things are part of socialism. And in my view, socialism is, in fact, the extension of the democratic struggles that took place in the 17th and 18th century. And in the 19th century, it emerged as the first workers' international, but it wasn't explicitly socialist. In fact, probably most of its members were anarchists. And if you look at the struggle in Ukraine, who are the people playing the greatest role from the left? Well, there's social movement, but there are the anarchists. And they certainly will be part of any genuine new international that is formed. So this will not be the socialist revived Second International, the communist revived Third International, or the Trotskyist revived Fourth International. If, in fact, we do form a new international movement, it will be more like the First International. And I think this is what we should be striving for. All these solidarity movements are movements in that direction.
Thank you, Ted. Bradley? Brad? I think you're on mute.
Okay, sorry. I'm going to to avoid sounding like I'm simply echoing Ted. I think people are pointing out that there is no inherent contradiction between the democratic revolution and socialist revolution. There's actually a whole theory of this called permanent revolution, which links the two, as Ted explained. And so therefore, practically speaking, on the international level, it's the task of socialists to build a international that fights for democratic rights worldwide and in each country, not just defensively, but offensively in the advancement, the so-called progressive advancement of democratic rights. Noting that the world system is not a democratic system, just because it's a world system broken up into numerous states. The reactionary far-right international is depending on working on through that system as it exists to advance its agenda, both in every country and internationally. Apparently on the basis not of Dugin's theories, but of the theories of an important American called Samuel Huntington. So we might want to read up on our Samuel Huntington to learn how to combat the far right today. But again, just to end here, we need to connect the democratic struggles with the struggle for socialism. And this is particularly glaringly evident in the United States, where we don't have much of a tradition to fall back on, and where it's very clear that the struggle for democratic rights is directly a struggle against capital. Thanks.
Am I audible? Are people able to hear each other?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Cheryl, John, are there
John,
others?
what's going on?
Other...
John, we don't hear you.
John is muted.
I can hear her.
I'm sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah,
Sorry
okay,
about
there
that.
you go.
Sorry about
Okay.
that. Linda.
Yeah, I want to echo Ted. The anarchists actually have started a new international. I can't remember the name, but they were working on it. It was in progress in 2018 when I was with the worker, the IWW. They were going to call it the International Workers Association, like the First International, but they came up with a different name. And it escapes me, and I haven't heard much about it since then. But yeah, there are people working on this idea already.
Thanks, Linda. I wanted to make a comment on what Ted pointed out about the First International, and I agree with him. And I would add another point, and that is that international did not arise as a brainchild of a few people. It arose out of a struggle of the working class itself. And so I think that any new international or how can I put it? And any new international tendency, any new international working class tendency, which I agree with Ted, will have all kinds of different schools of thought, anarchists, social democratic, socialists of different sorts, and so on. And it will arise, as I said, out of a struggle of the working class itself. And in my view, that struggle is in not very good shape right now. And I think that what we can do is at best start to anticipate that by starting to build some links, build a kind of a broader network and so on. And in light of that, I don't know, Kavita, if you'd be willing to talk at all about, since you left your former comrades, like what you're doing and how what kind of success or lack thereof you're finding in organizing, and your thoughts on further collaboration. But what's really brought us as socialists and anarchists and so on, what's really brought us together has been, support for Ukraine. But now we see that we have a lot more in common. And so also your thoughts on further collaboration amongst us, not, again, I just want to re-emphasize, not to build the next great international, but how we can, work together, learn from each other, and maybe anticipate a new movement of the working class. If you'd have any comments, and also what you're doing and what kind of connections you're making there in India.
Can I respond, or
Yeah,
shall we?
Please do.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that, one interesting thing, which I think Bradley mentioned just now, actually, I have recently been reading Huntington again and revisiting that and finding that actually what he was saying was actually misrepresented quite a lot during the way we received it on the left in India, certainly. So I think that whole phrase, clash of civilizations and all of that, that was seen as a, what we received it as was a sort of encouragement for Western civilization to try and triumph over Islam or whatever it was. I think that the problem right now is that Huntington was saying something much closer to, in fact, what today's far right is saying in terms of multipolarity, and what the left is saying as well. Basically, the idea that there should be common ground that should be sought. Sure, there are all these civilizational differences, and where the left language differs is that they may not use the word civilizations. But essentially, because they are not confronting the fact that other people are using the word civilization and the concept of civilization, their own language is then bolstering that idea that different spheres of influence exist, and we need the so-called, Western, whatever, political or civilizational, you take your pick based on whether you're left or right wing. The idea that should be finding common ground with everyone everywhere, including all the, authoritarian and far right regimes everywhere. So I find that you're absolutely right that there is a very distinct similarity and distinct ground there that needs to be explored more between Huntington and what's happening today. But Dugin, I find to be, much more explicit, you see. He's much more explicit, basically saying quite clearly that these different civilizations and that we want a fascist system, and we won't be stupid like Hitler was and all of that. We are kind of much more, fascism in the purest sense and all of that. That's what he talks about. So yeah, just on the other question, I know that what we are talking about, when you say international solidarity is basically workers' solidarity and all of that, or just working together among various people who are socialist and principled, and on the right side of history where democracy is concerned. My let me put it this way, that I'm kind of finding my way here. Since I left the party, it is not that I have not entirely found, exactly what kind of organizing to do here and so on. I'm basically part of various kinds of feminist collectives, and we are doing what we have been doing for some time. But I am still, figuring out what best to do and how. But I should say that, you see, one of the things which I'm beginning to realize now is that because we tend to find a common cause, for instance, in Ukraine, with Ukraine socialist groups or left groups broadly, or so on, the problem there is that your solidarity, because you seek your solidarity there, and I don't see that that's wrong. But I'm just saying that I think I'm beginning to recognize that even those groups in many parts of the world are rather fringe groups there. And your solidarity with a larger movement cannot be only with who you think to be the representative of workers there, which is why the minute we say workers, the problem is that, workers are being represented by a revolutionary kind of representation is not very common anymore. And if you went for that kind of thing in India, for instance, you would end up with groups which have, yes, sure, they are absolutely, the left wing, they're workers, but they have no, they have no notion of solidarity with something, for instance, with Ukraine. There's nothing like that going to happen. So basically, then what are you going to do? What kind of, aren't we talking, in a very sort of broad way, because we may be individuals who find out, or small groups which find ourselves to be socialists and, not basically fools for Putin. But we don't represent entire worker struggles and all of that. And I don't think we should imagine that we do. At least I can't say that. So I'm just saying that again, what I'm trying to say is that I think that our effort as people who believe in a world which is not ruled by capital and which is basically, what we would broadly call socialist, is that we have to recognize that a lot of people, just to give you another little thing that I'm finding, the best people I'm reading today who explain the world as it is today to me, or whom I find it, I may not agree with them on every word, but I do find their analysis, their insights to be very, very useful. Very few of them are Marxists. Very few of them are leftists. They are not. And yet I find their analysis to be more materialist, more intelligent than almost everyone I can think of on the socialist spectrum, even among intellectuals and writers and so on. Which is what makes me pause to think that then, what we think of when the left defines itself as being, oh, we are not the liberals. The move from we are not liberal to we are anti-liberal to we are illiberal is a very, very fast and quick thing, which I keep seeing happening. And I sort of find in India, and India certainly, that my appreciation for liberal, for people who are just, liberal in the best sense of the word, in terms of just being tolerant of other opinions and not, arrogant enough to imagine that, their view of looking at the world is necessarily the final word. I find that becomes a more, people of that persuasion, I find easier to speak to, quicker to be in solidarity with, for instance, Ukraine, quicker to understand how Putin and Trump and Modi and so on band together. While anybody, even the best people, okay, even the ones who are anti-Putin on the left, socialists on the left who are anti-Putin, somewhere or the other, the minute you start talking about an analysis of Ukraine that is not made by a Marxist, they'll say, oh, but be careful because so-and-so is basically, they're not Marxists. And I say, no, I can't just read Marxists alone. I don't have to. Neither should I be forced to express what I'm saying about the world today in something that ticks certain Marxist boxes. That is the way I'm thinking right now. That is what I'm trying to think about in terms of what I write and what I do. Naturally, many of the people I speak to and I find a common cause with all over the world are naturally socialists like I am. But, I feel as though all of us need to also be looking for common ground with those who don't identify as such, do not identify as necessarily anti-capitalist in the sense that we do, who basically, I find it, let me put it this way, that for me, the bar is set at this level, that as long as you don't identify capitalism as the, defining thing about democracy, as long as for you, democracy, you're willing to see that capitalism or, is anti-democratic, I don't require you to say, all right, I'm for a revolutionary overthrow of capitalism in order for me to, respect what you're saying about the world and maybe learn from you. And maybe you may be right on things that I'm wrong about, that kind of thing.
If I could comment, my experience here, 99% of the people, and that's a conservative estimate, who call themselves Marxists have more in common with the Trump supporters than anybody else, in that they are living in a fantasy world. And I mean, that's as far from Marxism as you can possibly imagine. But another big part of the problem here is that a huge sector of the working class is living in that fantasy world of MAGAism, Trumpism. And
yes,
I don't know if you've heard about that train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio. So there was a train that derailed and was carrying a lot of toxins on it. It caught fire. They had to burn off the vinyl chloride was main, but not the only toxin. They had to burn it off, and it seems like it might be little mini Chernobyl, in that whole area will become unlivable. And there's a whole lot of issues as far as deregulation and train safety and all kinds of attacks on the railroad workers, all kinds of things. The majority of the people, and certainly of the working class people that live in that area, are Trump supporters. And I've been involved in a Facebook group with these people. And the first thing, they over and over again, they attack, quote, big government. But the problem isn't big government. The problem is the corporations, And so then I got a letter from a railroad worker in Ukraine offering solidarity. And I posted it on there. there wasn't one single comment about it, you know? And so to me, the big part of the problem is a devastating crisis in the working class and in the working class movement. And anyway, I think it's going to take some huge shock to change that around. And as I said about Marxists, I mean, they're just religious fanatics, really, hiding behind Marxism, the great majority of them.
Yeah, it's the same, you know, what you said just now about workers. I mean, absolute same in India also, that, you know, the large part of the working class basically sees, you know, they say that Modi sounds like someone like us. It's he speaks to us. And even if they are not supporting his Islamophobic agenda openly or completely, even if they're not really recognizing that and voting for that, they are still, you know, voting for the idea of a authoritarian ruler who it's comforting to think that he must know what he's doing and that we don't have to think about it. And he's better than everyone else because we don't see anyone else on TV ever, do we? That kind of thing. But, you know, to me, basically, as you said, I mean, even those on the left who adopt, and I don't mean in India, I mean even in the US, you know, friends of mine and so on who, you know, who I've known all my political life probably. I find that, you know, for some time I've been uneasy with the idea that, you know, when they define, you know, for instance, feminism. So if that entire attack is on whatever, you know, is liberal feminism, and the idea that liberal feminism is just, you know, it's just capitalism packaged this way, and so, you know, we are basically, you have to define feminism in this whole kind of Marxist way, and, you know, the workers, that's what I feel very uneasy about, because that will be said. Now the point is, I used to think even then that, yeah, maybe they have to do it this way in America because maybe, you know, liberal feminism is whatever Hillary Clintonism or whatever, and you have to. But the point, even then it used to strike me, but that look, when there's a Hillary Trump confrontation going, there's a lot of anti-feminism being directed against Hillary Clinton as well, whom I'm not calling. I'm not, you know, with her feminism. But the fact is, I do recognize that there is an anti-feminism working against her and for Trump. And at the same time, in India, I would keep saying that, you know, in India, what, you know, they are saying about, you know, what my left friends in America are saying about feminism, it means nothing here because there's anti-feminism here. And so many, you know, those of, you know, people like me who joined the left movement in our college days in the 90s, we had to fight every inch of the way inside left movements and organizations to change the idea that you know, the fact that being left meant you are not a feminist, meant that there you were anti-feminist, therefore you were homophobic and absolutely misogynist. And this was with women's organizations associated with the left. It was hard going to change these things there. And then to see that even now feminism is not common sense in India. So, you know, it feels as though if there's an international language of feminism we are talking about, then it's arrogant to talk about, you know, some kind of anti-liberal feminism, because in India, that's just illiberal feminism. To speak about the right of women to wear short skirts in India, for the longest time, and even now to some extent, you have left women leaders in India, certainly, but in Nepal, even now, saying that, oh, that's capitalism. That's just capitalism. And, you know, it's a capitalist. I've heard Nepali women leaders of the highest rank in the left say these things. You know, so that's again what I mean, that, you know, distinction from liberals is the last priority. I think it shouldn't be on our minds at all. Yeah, distinction from, you know, capitalist bigwigs, yes, you know, from capital, yes, but not from liberal ideology. Yeah.
Thank you, Kavita. Chris, you haven't spoken yet, so why don't you go ahead? You have to unmute yourself. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, thank you very much. Kavita, I can very well understand your line of arguments. I would like to add an issue, and that's the ecological challenge. The Earth, the physical Earth system is changing rapidly. And however, capital will not be able to really resolve the problem, we don't see any sign or measures that under the capitalist mode of production, it will be possible to really defossilize the economy. We even see the opposite. I would even argue that since a year or two or so, we see some kind of fossil backlash in many parts of the world. So this raises very brutally the question of power over capital. And this goes far beyond your line of argument, focusing on democracy. So it only makes sense if we have really a broad sense of democracy. So the overproduction, of course, production and capital. But this indeed is a anti-capitalist, or I would say eco-socialist or even revolutionary eco-socialist perspective. So how do you deal with this ecological challenge? How you integrate in your vision of how you see the world?
Yeah, I think that's such an important question. And as for me, the way I see it is that two things. One is that, the far right in the world right now, and if you look at, we just spoke about Elon Musk or Putin. These are fossil oligarchs. Okay, so these are fossil fuel oligarchs. And so the fact that the anti-democratic forces in today's world come from that background, that is one place in which to basically make people realize that, one is, if there was not this kind of dependence on fossil fuel, then probably, Russia's hold over so many parts of the world would be far less, and all of that. But I think that also, when it comes to, what you say is an anti-capitalist, eco-socialist kind of struggle. What I say about democracy is also for the space to fight for those things, right? So just as, John just said that, so many workers basically, or the people in the areas worst hit by climate change are the biggest deniers of climate change. So, part of democracy is fighting that climate change denial and having the space to do it. In order to do it, you have to fight the conspiracy theorists and the, all of that. And that entire ecosystem of conspiracy theorists is almost without exception, dominated by the far right. And with a whole lot of useful people on the left contributing to it. So I think that that's what I mean in terms of, and those on the left will call themselves anti-capitalist. That is where I see the problem. That if you say you're anti-capitalist and this and that, and then you're basically, giving room to various kinds of far-right ideas, whichever ones suit your particular persuasion and place in the world, then I just feel like, giving up that distinction of saying anti-capitalist, because that is not a useful thing anymore. I cannot identify who I'm speaking to just because they say they're anti-capitalist. I have to ask, other questions to figure out where exactly they stand today. Which is why I say, by democracy, I mean the right to fight against climate change denialism and to fight to demand that the poorest and the most vulnerable to climate change catastrophes get protection, and that capitalism cannot protect us from this. Yeah.
Thanks, Kavita. Simon, and then Bradley.
Okay. A really interesting discussion about Hindu nationalism ended up with a also really interesting discussion about, you know, what we think about the movement and how to go forward, honestly. So just my few thoughts about it, because I saw Kavita's comments on Twitter a few days ago, which are related to what she's saying now. And it's, I got like, I see a point of agreement and disagreement, because I think what is really dividing us on this is, maybe it's going to sound funny, but I think geography and the political tradition we are in the country we are in. Because when we say about Ukraine solidarity, for example, I can relate to my country in Poland. It's really simple to be pro-Ukraine in Poland. Everyone's pro-Ukraine. So if I want to show left solidarity to Ukraine, that's actually a struggle. You have to find a way to say that, no, it's not, because, you know, everyone say send weapons to Ukraine. That's not a problem in my country. You have to figure a way of finding this kind of a progressive leftist way of finding solidarity. And I think we did, as a left as a whole in Poland, develop such ways of like raising this feminist issues. For example, you know that there's an abortion ban in Poland, which also affects Ukrainian refugee women, which came from a country where abortion was completely legal. There is the situation with the Ukrainian debt, which Razem party was actually really arguing to fight against the Ukrainian debt. There is a lot of help to Ukrainian trade unions made by workers' convoys organized, for example, by Inicjatywa Pracownicza, which is a anarcho-syndicalist trade union. And there is also the struggle on the Polish-Belarusian border, which really gives us this distinction that we are on the left because we support all refugees, and not like the right and many liberals do when they say, yeah, we support Ukraine refugees, they can come to Poland because there's a war there, but close the borders on the Belarusian border because it's a hybrid war and other people are dying on the border. And when you say in Poland, for example, as I said, it's easy to be a Ukraine supporter, but being a Ukraine left supporter means something different, because you say, for example, we support people who, whatever they come from, yeah, and they say, no, you're even if you do solidarity work towards Ukraine, the government officials will say you're a Kremlin troll because you support hybrid war. And I totally, and coming to an end, I totally understand your point of view because you come from India, where everyone supports Russia and all the political spectrum. So I think there's not really a big disagreement. It's just a question of this political tradition we have to deal with in our countries. I guess I see it that way.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all.
I get that. Yeah.
So Bradley?
Yeah, I agree with Kavita that we have priorities, that our first priority in the context of Ukraine social solidarity is to fight against and expose the pseudo lefts who are converging with the far right, in fact, many of them, as well as clarify any confusion which exists, which I think does exist in the broader left as such. But we can't ignore entirely the liberals. And this is particularly glaring in a country like the United States, since again, what I know best, so my apologies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just let me say that the liberals here claim to be also in solidarity with Ukraine, just like us, supposedly. They also claim to support democracy. But in fact, we know that, and if by liberals we mean in the regime here, the Biden Democrats, which I think they are currently the liberals, one of the first things they did after the elections, and even before the election ended, was to begin to pivot against what is really the leading democratic struggle in the United States right now, which is against the police state, our awful police who dominate all the municipalities and their politics throughout this country. And we know it's the Black Lives Matter, and it was the George Floyd uprising, which shocked everybody, including the liberal Democrats, who since then have been city by city attempting to put in a more pro-cop administration in order for them to push back against this leading democratic struggle in this country. So these people are not small d Democrats, but they're liberals. And likewise, I would question how much solidarity they really have with Ukraine. They're not really willing to supply Ukraine with the military hardware as soon as possible to actually cause Ukraine to win this war sooner and bring it to a real end. So we do need, not all contradictions are equal. The main contradiction is the one about that's inside the left, as everybody has noted. But secondarily, we have this second front with the so-called liberals on the points that I just mentioned. And we really have to handle both of them in their inequality in the present circumstance. Thanks.
Cheryl?
Yeah, so this is an excellent discussion, and I think all excellent discussions end up raising more questions and food for thought than they do answers. So that's my definition. But so we have recently been presented with a challenge that brings together all the elements that are being talked about here, which is in Atlanta, the city of Atlanta. There is a struggle against this cop city, which is a project that's a further militarization and privatization of the police. I don't know if everybody outside the United States, and there are many people here who are outside the United States, are aware of it. But so there is a kind of a broad, not even a coalition, but there's a number of different groups, activists that have gotten involved in the protest against this cop city project, and including Medea Benjamin and the campus. They have been actively trying to insert themselves and their reactionary agenda, their anti-Ukraine, pro-Putin agenda, into a lot of these activist movements wherever they're cropping up, whether it's climate change and anti-police violence, etc. So this came to our attention because on our Facebook page there was a discussion going on about it, and how really we have to take a stand on this. We can't just let it go. There is one person who's on our Facebook page who's in Atlanta, who is not involved in that struggle directly, but he knows many people who are. I believe he's an anarchist. So we've had some discussions with him and a few other people in our campaign who feel strongly that we have written a draft of an open letter to the activists there, drawing the parallels between what Putin is trying to accomplish in Ukraine, which is a countrywide version of Cop City, and what their fight is. This is a concrete example of, drawing together, the battle against international right-wing movements and the local struggles for democracy and rights. So it's very challenging. And so when this meeting comes to an end, when this discussion comes to an end, people, I hope a few of us, or those who can, are welcome to stay. We're going to discuss how exactly the language should be in this letter, this open letter that will be addressed to the activists in Cop City. So this is a very concrete example of exactly what we're talking about, because in this struggle, there are anarchists, there are Stalinists, there are liberals, Sierra Club, people like this. So this is the challenge I think we all face, is figuring out how to do this. And not many people are trying to figure out how to do this.
Thanks. Thanks, Cheryl. Anybody, I'm gonna post some of that language here. If anybody, I think we're kind of heading towards a conclusion of the formal meeting. And anybody who wants to stick around, maybe if Kavita would like to make any final comments, and we would love it, Kavita, if you would stick around to participate in this follow-up
It's
discussion.
late, yeah.
Maybe you have other
Yeah.
priorities, but anyway,
Yeah,
before we
it's kind of
formally
late,
conclude the meeting, Kavita,
Yeah.
if you'd like to.
Yeah, I think it was very, very useful for me as well, very helpful for me to have this conversation. And as I said, I think that, this is a process for me of not being sure of too many things, except I'm absolutely sure of of this anti-democratic language and politics, shared politics and political language that I'm hearing. And right now, that is something I'm sure about. How exactly to, organize against it, and where exactly, how exactly I would define my politics more broadly. I think those are things I'm in the process of exploring. But one thing about what Bradley said, I'll just kind of second that entirely, fully. When I say liberal, by no means do I mean, liberal in the sense of, the Democratic Party or the Congress Party in India and all of that. That is not my position at all. I mean, in terms of, voices that are genuinely advocating for various kinds of democratic movements and struggles, but who do not, describe themselves or think of themselves as being socialist. There are many examples. I don't want to get into specifics there, but I would say that, absolutely. I think, but that's the whole thing, right? That we would be criticizing the Biden administration for not doing enough for Ukraine. We would not be criticizing it for, doing too much for Ukraine. And basically that's what Trump would say. And that's what Media Benjamin would say, that why aren't we focusing on our problems, and, why are we spending money on, wars abroad? So everybody from Ron Paul to, Mearsheimer to Media Benjamin to the Biden administration, many in the Biden administration. So I think that we know what we mean, right? And the same thing goes for so many other things, for migrants' rights, for, police state kinds of things, all this. I think that the government and the party, these are not obviously, these are not liberal measures. So any Democrat, genuine, what I mean is small d Democrat, must fight back against these measures. I think that all I'm saying is that, having anti-capitalism as one's calling card is not a guarantee that you're really serious about fighting for democracy. That's all. It doesn't mean that in order to fight for democracy, you do not have to fight capitalism. I don't think that is what I'm saying. Maybe, yeah. It's late here and I'm a little garbled probably at the end of it. Yeah. But thank you. That conversation was really great. Yeah.
Okay, well, with that, we're going to bring the formal meeting to an end. And again, thank you very much, Kavita and everybody else, and to be continued.